Welcome, folks, once again. This time I'm going to discuss poliovirus infection. Why I have picked this topic is because 24 hours ago, BBC has published a news report that says poliovirus has been detected in North London sewage samples. And today, the UK Health Security Agency has declared a national incident. So basically, what has happened is that the UK HSA, that is the Public Health Agency of United Kingdom, that has been as a part of routine surveillance now. It studies sewage samples, and it was studying the sewage samples from a sewage facility which actually serves the population of North London, and North London is a very populated area, around 4 million population. So between February of this year and May, they found out that there were different samples that tested out positive for poliovirus, and most of these samples they were genetically related to one another because they studied the genome of this virus as well, and they found out that all the different samples that they tested and those are positive, they were somehow related with one another. So they hypothesized that probably this has been shed by a person who to some extent was immunocompromised, and he got this vaccine outside of UK. Remember, oral polio vaccine is not offered in the UK. There are only a few countries where now the oral polio vaccine is offered, Pakistan being one of them. So this person probably traveled abroad, got this oral polio vaccine as a part of his travel requirements, and then when he came back, probably his immune system was a bit compromised and he was constantly shedding this virus. And that's why the different sewage samples, they tested positive. Now, the question is, what does it mean for the larger British population? Because UK has been polio free since I think the last case here happened in 1984, and since 2003, World Health Organization has declared UK officially free of polio. So virus has been eliminated, and this status remains since 2003. So in other words, there hasn't been a single case since 1984. And remember, this also this report, this talks about the sewage samples. Not a single human case has occurred. So what it does for the larger public, we would try to understand the polio virus, how it causes disease, and what are the different types of vaccines and how do they produce immunity. So without further ado, let's dive in and talk about the polio virus. Now, before I start talking about the virus itself, let me give you a little bit of the epidemiological background of this virus. This virus has been affecting human population since old times. I have shown a picture which I've taken from Wikipedia, and this is basically an Egyptian sort of a painting on a wall, and that shows an Egyptian man who has got an atrophied one lower limb. So if you look, his right limb is quite small as compared to the left limb, and he's holding a sort of a stick to walk. So probably this person was paralyzed in one leg and he was using a walking aid. And one of the diseases that cause this type of picture, asymmetric paralysis of the limbs, is polio. So probably polio was affecting the population at those old times as well. So it seems like it's quite an old disease. Now it's been affecting human populations since ages, but the major breakthrough in the control of polio came in when the polio vaccine was discovered. There's a slight mistake here, so let me correct this one. So the first major breakthrough in vaccine control of poliovirus came when the Salk virus, which is the injectable vaccine, that was introduced in the 1950s. And then it was followed by the oral vaccine, which is known as the Sabin vaccine, that was introduced in the early 60s. And since then, the world itself has controlled polio. Again, the number of cases drastically went down. And now, as of now, I think most of the world is polio free, except a few countries, including Afghanistan and Pakistan, where polio is still endemic. Now, the current initiative to eradicate polio after smallpox was eradicated, that was started in 1988. This program was known as PEI, Polio Eradicating Initiative. and this has been successfully implemented in many countries where they have eliminated polio virus from the population. Now only a few countries left. Some of them are in South Asia, few of them are in Africa as well. So as of now, most of the world is polio free except a few countries. Now, moving on to the polio virus itself. The virion is a single stranded RNA virus. So, this is an RNA virus, just like the COVID 19 SARS CoV 2. This is an RNA virus. This is considered to be an enterovirus because it primarily goes through the mouth into the intestines and then affects or infects the lining of the intestine. So enteroviruses mean those group of viruses which go through your oral cavity into the intestines, and from there they enter the bloodstream and cause the disease. So it's one of the enteroviruses. Obviously, because the enteroviruses, the main route of transmission is fecal oral route. So somebody who has got this infection and he's shedding the virus in his feces, somehow if food or water contaminated by his feces is consumed by another person and he hasn't got the immunity, they can be affected by the virus. So three strains are important as far as the polio virus is concerned. They are known as the P1, P2, and P3 viruses. Now, I think one of them they say, has been eradicated. The other one, the last case occurred in 2012, but to some extent it's been coming back. But nevertheless, I mean, these are the three strains which are like clinically important. And these are the strains again which the oral polio vaccine and the inactivated or the injectable polio vaccine is made and is given to human population. Now, unlike SARS-CoV-2, which attaches to the ACE2 receptors on the respiratory epithelium, this virus, the polio virus, this attaches to CD11155 receptors on enterocytes. So the gut epithelium has got this receptor CD155. So this RNA attaches with this receptors. Then what happens is goes inside the intestinal epithelium where it starts replicate. So it hijacks the DNA material, starts making copies of it, makes different virons, and from there are two things: either it is then shed into the feces, or some copies of it also goes into the blood, causing primary viremia. And because of this primary viremia, there are constitutional symptoms which could be a very low grade fever, malaise, headache, body aches, so on and so forth. Rarely, well, which is not that common, it can sometimes cross blood-brain barrier if there are defects in the blood-brain barrier, and then it would go on and infect the lower motor neurons, and then can cause what we call as paralytic polio or bulbar polio as well. Again, there are different types. I will come to that in a moment, but that is quite rare. Most of the times, it causes asymptomatic infection. So 90 to 95% of the individuals who, in case if they get infected with the polio virus, they do not have any symptoms. 5 to 10% they develop mild symptomatic. So they might be having a mild fever, body aches, lethargy, headaches, things like that. So that is only 5 to 10%. Less than 1%, they develop what we call as paralytic polio. So paralytic polio, which is basically the most dreaded form of polio virus, that occurs only in less than 1% of individuals. But this is also important from public health point of view, because if you get one case of paralytic polio, you can understand that there would be 99 other cases which are non-paralytic, but it simply means that the infection is happening. There is a human-to-human transmission in the community. It's also important to understand that this is basically a disease of the children. So it mostly affects children less than 5 years of age, though again, majority of them are less than 6 months of age. But by and large, kids less than 5 years of age, they've got slightly weakened immunity as compared to their adults counterparts. So that's why it affects mostly children less than 5 years of age. And again, remember, majority of these kids have got no symptoms. Only 5 to 10% have got mild symptoms, which can occur in any types of viral illness, and only less than 1% would have this dreaded paralytic polio, where one limb actually gets weakened and paralyzed. There have been a few individuals who have been known to have paralytic polio, One is the American president Franklin Roosevelt. He was considered to be suffering from polio, but then later on it came to be known that probably he did not had polio, because he got polio at the age of 29 or 39, when you know that normally polio is a disease of the children, so it's very rare for adults to get polio. And the other thing is that he was using a wheelchair, so he had both of his limbs paralyzed. So very rarely polio would give you, like, symmetrical paralysis of the lower limbs. It usually by and large causes asymmetric paralysis of the lower limbs. So it's thought that probably Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was thought to be suffering from polio, basically was suffering from Guillain-Barré syndrome. We don't know that, but just like, for sake of interest, just like told you about this thing. So remember, most of the cases are children less than 5 years of age. Now, coming down to the pathophysiology, especially of paralytic polio, because this is the one that we usually dread. Because I told you that if most of the infections are asymptomatic, there's nothing to worry about that. And even if there are mild constitutional symptoms, again, that can happen in any illness. So, what's so special about that? But important thing, though rare, is paralytic polio. Now, the question is how it causes paralytic polio. What is the relation between this virus and the lower motor neurons? Because this type of paralytic polio basically is a lower motor neuron disease. So they say one theory is that the virus can, travel through a break in the blood-brain barrier. So if there is some form of compromise in the blood-brain barrier, there is a sort of a breach. Then if there is a generalized viremia and the immunity is a bit weakened, that virus can travel, into the central nervous system, and then can affect the lower motor neurons. It can affect the lower motor neurons at the lower part of the brain, causing paralysis of the glossopharyngeal, vagus, 11th or 12th cranial nerves. Or it can go down and cause the, destruction of the lower motor neurons, and can cause paralysis of one or the other limb. There is another theory as well, and that is about the retrograde axonal travel via injured nerves. It has been seen, especially in developing countries, that many kids they got polio, paralytic polio, after they were given some form of intramuscular injections. So again, there has always been a debate why there is some form of association between intramuscular injections because of anything. It might be an antibiotic injection or any other types of injection, and but these are intramuscular injection, and then the this paralytic polio happening after that. They say that there is a theory of retrograde axonal travel by injured nerve. So somehow with intramuscular injections, if the nerve is damaged, if the axons are, the peripheral fibers are known as axons, so what would happen? The virus which is there in the body would actually travel retrograde upward in these nerves, and would reach the cell body of the lower motor neuron, and that is the what we call the main part, the anterior horn cells, and then it would destroy that. So if the lower motor neurons are destroyed, what would happen? The muscle of that particular area gets denervated. It wouldn't have any supply, so it would get weakened, and then later on it would get atrophied because it's not being used, or the child cannot use it. So it would lead to weakness and ultimately paralysis of that side. So there are two theories. One is that it either enters through a breach in the blood-brain barrier, and the other one is that there is a retrograde flow through the damaged neurons, which might be the reason of association between paralytic polio and the administration of intramuscular injections. So it destroys, and in either case, in paralytic polio, it destroys the lower motor neurons, and these lower motor neurons are in the spinal cord. They can be in the brainstem as well. So if it destroys the lower motor neuron in the spinal cord, only we call the spinal type of paralytic polio. If it only destroys the lower motor neuron in the brainstem, like from where the, let's say, the vagus, the 11th and the 12th nerves, they come out, we will call that bulbar type. So it can be spinal type, it can be bulbar type, or sometimes it can be combination where it is affecting the bulbar part of the brain as well as the spinal cord. We call it the spinobulbar type. Most of the cases, again, clinically, most of the cases are spinal type. Some of them are spinobulbar, and the bulbar itself per se is a bit rare as compared to all these clinical entities. So eventually, whatever happens, there is destruction of the lower motor neurons that would lead to asymmetric muscular weakness. Asymmetric muscular weakness would then lead to disuse, atrophy of the lower limb, and obviously that would lead to sort of a disability. And obviously, there are other social issues associated with that, as I'm not going to go into details of that. Remember, from clinical point of view, denervation, weakness, followed by paralysis and atrophy of the muscles. And if it happens in the lower limbs, the child would need a walking aid, like a walking stick, pair of crutches, or might be wheelchair bound for the rest of his life. Okay, guys. Moving on to the vaccines, there are two types of vaccines: inactivated polio vaccine, which is known as the injectable vaccine, and the oral polio vaccine, which are known as the polio drops. The IPV was discovered first in the mid or late 50s. This actually uses viral proteins. So it uses the viral proteins which are there on the surface of the polio virus, and these viral proteins are injected into the human body. So it's given in the form of injection, and then it induces immunity against those proteins. So in case if the real virus comes, those antibodies would like attack it and destroy the virus before it can cause any damage. So that is inactivated. It's usually given as 3 injections and is followed by a childhood booster. And this is given in most of the developed countries these days. I think in the United States of America, they are only giving this inactivated polio vaccine since 2000. They didn't use like oral polio vaccine since 2000. So the last 22 years they've been only using IPV. Even here in UK, they only use the inactivated polio vaccine. So it's given as 3 injections followed by a childhood booster. But because it's given as an intramuscular, it produces antibody, there is no gut immunity. So it doesn't go through the natural way as the infection happens in case of natural poliovirus infection, because the virus goes through the mouth into the intestine, replicates in the gut epithelium. In case of oral polio vaccine, this actually uses the live attenuated polio vaccine. So this is basically a live virus. This is an alive virus which cannot cause a disease, so it's been attenuated. So it actually maintained its antigenetic or antigenic structure, but it's not able to cause disease. So this is given, and basically it's given in 3 doses. But in most of the endemic countries, they are given repeatedly in order to eliminate this from the population, leading towards eradication goal. They have to, give kids booster doses again and again and again. So they're not only given 3 doses, they are given multiple booster doses even after they have got the 3 doses. Now, what happens in this particular case, because this is an alive virus, it goes into the gut epithelium and then it multiplies. So it goes into, and then what happens is that when it goes into the bloodstream, it produces antibodies. Obviously, it cannot cause disease because it's an attenuated one, but it does produce antibodies. At the same time, what happens is that there is some gut immunity as well, because it's replicating in the gut. So the gut also develops some form of humoral immunity against the virus, and next time the actual virus comes, it's not easy for the virus to enter the intestinal epithelium. While in case of the IPV, it would be able to enter through the intestinal epithelium, but when it will go into the blood, it would be attacked by the antibodies and destroyed. But in case of the gut immunity present, then it would not only, it would not be able to even go inside the intestinal cells. So this is how there is difference between the OPV and the IPV. But remember, because OPV is a live vaccine, sometimes when it is multiplying, because it depends on the replication inside the gut epithelium during this replication, and because it's an RNA virus, and RNA virus can spoof the immunity and can cause mutation itself as it is dividing. It's more prone to develop mutation as compared to DNA viruses. So mutations do happen, and sometimes it can mutate into a virulent form. And if it goes into a virulent form, it can cause what we call as VDPV, which is vaccine-derived poliovirus. So vaccine-derived poliovirus basically is a poliovirus which has mutated while you gave the vaccine virus, and it mutated to a form which is causing poliovirus infection. We call it as VDPV, and it can also cause paralytic polio, just like the wild polio vaccine. We call it VAPP. So VDPV is basically vaccine-derived polio virus infection, not necessarily paralytic. But if it causes this is same like mutant strain. If it causes paralytic polio, we would call it VAPP or vaccine-associated paralytic polio. And if you look at the data, basically because of this widespread use of oral polio vaccine, leading to more chances of mutation. If you see in the last 2 3 years, there have been more cases of vaccine derived polio virus as compared to the natural one. So if you see, I think probably 176, 140 cases of natural virus infection, wild polio virus infection, while most of the cases, more than 1,000 cases of vaccine derived polio virus happened. So these days, most of the cases are because of vaccine derived polio virus, which is coming from mutation of the oral polio vaccine. That's why most of the countries where they are using inactivated polio vaccine, they don't use oral polio vaccine anymore, because they say that oral polio vaccine can cause increased number of this VDPV in those populations where there is less immunity or less vaccine uptake. So that's why World Health Organization is also now shifting the focus on inactivated polio vaccine. Now coming back to the thing that whether what does this mean for the British population or for that reason any developed country if their sewage samples are positive for polio virus. The thing is that because the general immunization levels are quite high in this country, and most of the kids they have got like inactivated polio vaccine, so it's would be very rare, would be very rare for someone to develop like polio vaccine because there is no OPV. So and already if they have had the IPV, they are already immune against that. So that's why the chances of a real outbreak are very slim. The other thing is a very interesting article which was published in the Journal of Virology, and that actually talks about the seven virus reversion in the field. It's a comprehensive analysis of seven like polio virus isolates in Nigeria. So this what they studied is that they studied this oral polio vaccine and how it leads to mutations causing vaccine derived polio virus which can cause infection. And they found out that the protein on the surface of this virus, as it replicates, it can it can go through mutations which not only helps in attachment of this virus to the cell, but it also helps in injecting the RNA of the virus into the host cells. And that's one of the reasons that more the number of mutations, more are the chances of vaccine derived polio virus arising out of that. So the thing is that the chances of a real epidemic because of polio virus is quite slim in all those populations which have got a very high immunization coverage. So I hope you've liked this video. Please give me a thumbs up if you liked it. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do subscribe and press the bell so you are always on board with me when I upload a new video. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye bye.